All right. Well, let's get started before we get too much later here. I am going to hand off this to our moderator soon, but really quick, I just wanted to welcome everybody to the Grow Farmer Forum on cover crop seeding. We have a really great lineup of farmers. I'll introduce them briefly. You'll hear more from them later, but we have Jay Baxter. He's from Georgetown, Delaware. That's on the Delmarva Peninsula. Don Branton, who's from upstate New York, near Leroy, New York, which he tells me is the birthplace of Jell-O. So bit of a celebrity here today. And then finally, you can't see him, but he's here. Matt Ensor is from Thorndale, Texas, which is down sort of between Austin and College Station. So we've got a really interesting geographic spread. And then we have Jody McVeigh, who's going to be our moderator. She's a conservation agronomist with a lot of experience in farm and conservation practices really all over the country. But right now she's pursuing a PhD at Texas A&M. So she's going to sort of steward us through a big list of questions we have for these guys on cover crop seeding. So I will turn it to her shortly, but before that, I want to just plug a few things. Some housekeeping items. This is a webinar. You've probably noticed you can't talk, but we do have both a Q&A box and a chat box at the bottom. I'll be monitoring that, as will Mark Van Gessel, Extension Weed Specialist at the University of Delaware, and John Wallace, Extension Weed Specialist at Penn State. So we'll be watching that. We might pop in with questions if they're super timely, but for the most part, we'll save them for the end. I'll also watch the chat box. So if you have any technical issues or anything, I'll try to help you with that. And I did want to just make sure you're all familiar with Grow on our website. I'm sure you all are, but if you're not, you should head over there and subscribe to it. You'll get weekly news and research updates on integrated weed management practices really happening all over the country. And it's also just a really good resource on the different ways to control weeds, especially in the face of herbicide resistance. So if you're on social media, I put up some of our handles, so follow us there. And I can't hold a webinar on cover crops without mentioning the cover crop councils. We've got the URLs for the Northeast, Southern, Midwest, and Western, and they're great resources with regionally specific information for anyone who's really looking to start cover crops or deepen their knowledge about them. So finally, we will have CEU credits at the end of this. They're on integrated pest management, sustainability, and crop management. So if you stick with us through the whole thing, we'll show you how to access them at the end. So I think I will hand things over and stop sharing my screen. Jody can take it away.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks for inviting me to be the moderator. And thank you, gentlemen, all for taking the time as busy farmers to join us today and share your wisdom and information. And I'd encourage also people to share the information about Grow to anyone that you can, because it will really be an asset to anybody that you meet if you're interested in controlling weeds. So let's just pursue this. The first question is, gentlemen, we'd like you to introduce yourselves and give us a brief description about your farm and your cover crop history. And how about if we start with Jay?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Jay Baxter. I'm in Georgetown, Delaware, which is the county seat of the southernmost county in Georgetown, or excuse me, in the state of Delaware. We are approximately 20 minutes drive to the ocean and another hour's drive to the Chesapeake Bay. So we are theoretically surrounded by water. I farm with my family. It's mainly my sister and I. I've got 4 children of my own, my oldest being 15, my next being 13, and they're both very active here at Baxter Farms. My wife and I have a couple of other side businesses that we're operating. We operate as a small farm ourselves. And we have started to diversify our operation into greenhouses. We have 9 greenhouses. We grow potted flowers on wholesale. We have a wholesale contract with a company that has the wholesale contract with Home Depot. So everything we grow ends up at Home Depot. It's a beautiful way for us to start our mornings in the springtime, is looking at pretty flowers. And we also, it was interesting, Emily's share screen showed a cover crop air seeder, a Miller cover crop air seeder. That machine is now in our possession through another company we started called Delmarva Cover Crop Solutions, which is a custom application business seeding cover crops. And with that, we also sell seed. So we've got quite a bit going on. Baxter Farms as a whole, we grow corn and soybeans, processing vegetables such as lima beans and sweet corn. We've started to dabble in sunflowers a couple years now. We've also worked with edamame, trying to diversify into a fresh market there with edamame. So it's a good time to be a farmer.
Thank you very much, Jay. How about you, Don?
Yeah, Don Branton Farms LLC, located in Leroy, which is approximately 30 miles directly south of Lake Ontario, right along Interstate 90 between Rochester, New York, and Buffalo, New York. I originally was born and raised on a dairy farm. Lost my father when I was 13. Started farming on my own in 1979. Picked up some vacant land. Nobody was working and started farming part-time on my own. At the same time, I was working for a commercial fertilizer spray business, barn equipment, James Way barn equipment. So I had a little bit of exposure to the fertilizer and chemical side of it. And my exposure to the fertilizer side was, if you put more fertilizer on, you're going to get more crop. Well, that wasn't always true. You spent more money, I guess, but continued to expand the farming operation. Now I'm up to approximately 1,800 acres. Grain crops, corn, soybeans, cereal, rye. Originally, we grew a lot of cereal or a lot of wheat, but we've transitioned to cereal rye the last several years. We got a good market share for that. We ship the rye. The rye typically all gets used for cover crop seeds somewhere, somehow. We ship a lot of it out to Ohio, but that's been good. Straw, we have a local dairy farm that buys all the straw that we produce, and we've found it with rye, we have been as high as 2.5 tons of straw to the acre versus the best we'd ever done on wheat was 1.5 tons. So after we take the small grains off, we do grow some oats too again for cover crop. But after we take the small grains off, we now come in and do what is called bio strip till, where we will plant a overwintering species in one set of rows and the non-overwintering in the adjacent rows. And we have the equipment orientation so that our 40-foot drill matches up with our 16-row planter so that the rows coincide with one another the following year. I'm probably getting a little lost in my brief overview, but cover crop history, years ago when I worked for the fertilizer company, my job in the spring was to get up before daybreak, see if the wind's blowing in the spring. If it wasn't breezy, I would go load up the all-terrain vehicle at the time, an Argo 6-wheel all-terrain vehicle with a 12-volt grass seeder on the back, and I would go out and spread grass seed on wheat fields for local farmers. Excuse me, I got a frog in my throat, but I guess the last year I did that, I covered about 1,200 acres with this rig and got to see a lot of different farms, a lot of different operations. But that was probably my first introduction to cover crops with green manure. A lot of guys would grow dry beans after it, but so when I started farming on my own, yes, we would put some clover in with our wheat, and on occasion when we harvested some of the summer crops, not knowing what we're doing, we'd get some rye from a neighbor, maybe throw a little rye down, disc it in, and not knowing what we're doing, but we're putting a cover crop, so we thought, did not know the value of it, but our cover crop history has greatly expanded now with the biostrip till multi-species. Some of the mixtures between the in row and between row, we can be up to as many as 16 different species in the mix. And we focus on mycorrhizal association with some of the species, and non-overwintering and overwintering species, and we place them accordingly. But right now we're about 1,800 acres. We do custom drilling for some neighbors around, and our 40-foot drill typically goes over 2,000 to 3,000 acres a year between our own ground and neighboring ground. Seeding alfalfa or small grain wheat for some of the neighbors. We do some cover cropping for them also, but I'll cut it off at that, because I know there's
Thanks,
some
Don.
questions down the road. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. How about you, Matt?
So I'm in Central Texas at a small town called Thorndale, Texas. I got introduced into cover crops and no-till farming and just a different way of managing by some friends of mine that have been in no-till, basically the only no-till farmer in this area for the last 30 years. Everybody's very heavily conventional till. I guess they call it conventional till, 3-4 passes with a disc harrow and then on from there. But he introduced me, this guy's name's Randall Unash. He introduced me to cover crops and the magic that happens between the bacteria and the biology in the soil and the decaying roots and not disturbing that surface, and it triggered my interest in the whole industry. So I mainly am raise cattle. I've got a little bit of row crop land that I cover crop on during the off season, and then we'll graze it, intermittently with the cattle, and we're trying to utilize the land in many different ways to benefit the soil and to benefit the operation and the bottom line. And by rotating cattle, we can manage certain different weeds that are in our way, or by planting a cover crop mix, we can mitigate weed pressure. And it's really turned around the methods that we use here. So I was excited to get on here and learn some more. I'm 36 years old and always willing to learn more. So anything we can do to learn some more, I'd be interested in.
Thank you, Matt. And I really like that barbecue place in Thorndale, Matt. I go through there a lot and stuff.
Yeah, I actually, now that I see your face, I was at the Stiles Farm Foundation and I ran into you. We were at the New Seed Carinata tent out in the field.
Oh, yes. I was talking about fiber hemp that day.
That's correct. Yeah, I recognize you. So I'm actually working for the New Seed Carinata guys now, which that's a kind of a cover crop that they get a cash crop off of, but it does some good things for the soil too. It's a brassica. It'll be a good tool to add to our
Yes,
arsenal.
it will. Well, thanks for coming today. Let's move on to the next thing. How do you source your cover crop seed? Or do you grow your own? And if you do you ever have any situations that you have to deal with that, or is it easy for you to sell it? So how do you source your cover crop seed? And actually, Matt, we're going to go back to you first.
Okay, so we have I use a company called Lacrosse Seed. I'm not sure. I think they're all over the United States, but I met up with one of their reps. It used to be called Soil First, I think, and then Lacrosse bought that company. But they have a facility that they blend the seed and they ship it blended and inoculated, and they ship it direct to me. So that's how I've sourced it so far, because it's the easiest way. It's pretty expensive that way. I source some of my oats locally. The guy that I was talking about, the farmer that's been no-till, he has some grain bins, and he catches his own oats and cleans them and replants for seed oats. So, which that's a bulk of most of my, that's the highest seeding rate of the mixes that I use. So that allows me to, ship in less quantities, and then I can blend it myself into the planter with the oats. But as far as sourcing it goes, Lacrosse Seed, and then locally the oats here is what I do.
Thanks, Matt. How about you, Jay?
Sorry, needed to find the unmute button. So as a cover crop dealer, we do not grow enough cover crop. We have not been able to master growing the cover crop species that we are looking for in a cover crop or a cover crop blend. We utilize a lot of hairy vetch, and trying to grow those types of cover crops in our environment that are where it's just extremely wet. And I say that it's wet, it's not necessarily wet. I mean, we irrigate all the time, but it's damp. It's extremely damp. So trying to get a cover crop to dry down that we can capture the seed and hold on to it on something like these different species of cover crops, trying to get them to all mature at the same time, we would have to do some type of defoliation or something like that. And we just haven't mastered it yet. The scope of our farming operation with all that we have going on, that is on our 5-year goal, is to start getting into growing our own cover crop seed. I do believe that seed that is grown locally in our environment will thrive better the following year as a heritage seed versus something that would come from a completely different environment from, let's say, Matt in Texas or Don in New York, just because of our soils are so much different, and the species of biology in the soil are different and just adapted to the environment differently. So I do believe that there is quite a bit of market to be able to capture to grow our own seed into the future. But at this point in time, 95% of what we're is shipped in. We are locally sourcing rye, but we're not growing it ourselves. We've got about 5 acres of rye to harvest this year, still left, but that's more or less on an experimental basis.
Thank you. Thank you. How about you, Don?
Well, we cereal, rye, and oats are the only thing that we grow ourselves for cover crop. All the other species we source from outside sources, Seedway, Agriculture, various sources. And looking at some of the seed tags prior to this, sun hemp come from India, so it wasn't real close by. Hairy vetch, some of the hairy vetch came out of Australia. Some of the seeds came out of Canada and the USA. So various sources. We work with a seed supply organization that can source these products for us. It's worked out pretty good. You know, we ship cereal rye back out to them, and they'll sell us a cover crop seed, put stuff together. The biggest thing I would say is put your wants and needs together early in the season. We typically try to order everything in December at the end of the year, put a tentative order in so they can start sourcing things. So many people wait till this time of the year, want to put a cover crop in, they start calling their dealers for cover crop seed, and there's nothing locally to be had for the most part. It's got to be shipped in elsewhere, and truck freight could become a big obstacle in that too. But again, the oats and the rye we grow ourselves. Anything we produce ourselves, we work with Halsey Seed Lab, and we get testing done on everything, so we know what we've got.
Very good.
That is very, very important. You know, get the germination, get the seed counts, so you can adjust accordingly.
Thank you, Don. And the other thing, Don, I'm so glad that you brought that up about planning early, because I've seen the same thing happen, even just for research or farmers or many other situations where planning early, making sure you know where you're going to source your seed, and letting them know early so they can put the seed aside is Excellent. Thank you so much for bringing that up. It is so important.
Yeah, I just really quick, I wanted to share, Dawn sent this along. I think this is a seed test you did, Dawn.
Yes, this was, we were planning, supposed to be triticale for farm operation that actually was about 2.5 hours away from us, and putting down triticale seed that he was buying from another producer elsewhere, and we had to transfer it from his truck onto our seed tender so we could load our drill with it. And I was helping my son. We were getting ready to get started, and I was helping my son transfer the stuff over, and I kept looking at it and said, "This is not all triticale." So I called the farmer up and talked to him. I said, "Is this supposed to be all triticale?" "Yeah, why?" I said, "Well, there's a whole lot of something else in here, and it's not triticale seed." So I took a sample and sent it in at my own expense just to see. And you can see on this thing, it says what, 11,700. They called it cheat grass, but man, it was full of it, and it just. That's why I'm very adamant that you need to test your seed and see what the hell you got. You know, germination is important, but purity is big too in this case here. So it ended up, he was going to grow some of it to have his own seed for the following year. And with ourselves being hooked up with Seedway and Agriculture as a dealer, we got some certified seed for him that we put in for his seed stock for the following year. But he was quite, I don't know exactly how to say, quite in awe when he found out, when I sent him the results of the sample, what he was actually buying. He was not.
Well,
not
the
real-
other thing, yeah, and the other thing is too, and I know you'll agree with me, is that some states have certain laws that you have to abide by if you're growing your own seed and selling it. So you should know what they are in your state. So
Yeah.
that's really important. But let's move on, because we have some other great questions here for all of you. And this time we're going to start with Jay. What cover crop species do you grow and why? And do you use mixes and why? And do you use certain criteria, Jay, for choosing which species you're going to use?
All right, so there's a lot. Let me go
there's a lot
back
in
and
that
share
question.
a little bit of history from the beginning. So when I got out of college, my last year in college, came home to the farm. My father passed away my senior year in college, and I was farming at that point in time with my uncle and my grandfather, and we were conventional farmers up until that point. We were completely pulverizing our soil because that's what we knew, and knew there had to be just something done differently. We were pumping wastewater from a local municipality, and in order to utilize our ground properly to pump wastewater, we needed to have a crop growing all the time, 365 days a year, 12 months out of the year. So started doing some research on cover crops, and instead of just getting something like bin run wheat or barley just in order to meet a criteria, started doing research as to what we could actually do with cover crops to be advantageous for us moving forward, and kind of got connected into a neighboring farmer down in Virginia, about an hour south of here, and he has perfected the utilization of hairy vetch, and I soon adopted a lot of his practices. And our first year of growing hairy vetch, we were able to contribute ourselves about 65 units of nitrogen into our corn crop, and I was immediately hooked. It was very interesting to try to plant through. It was very interesting to work with, but we have since done an awful lot to I'll say perfect it, but every year we end up with some type of hiccup, and there's pictures to come that'll show some of the whoopses that we have to deal with cover crops. I'm still learning about cover crop mixes and all the different mixes and why we utilize them. I was a big skeptic for a very long time as to why we needed so many different species in a mix. And I'm learning that it is very advantageous for my soil and very advantageous for my soil microbiology if we have a multi-species of cover crops growing that we can utilize. Now, depending on the following cash crop is how I generally pick the cover crop species that I grow. Hairy vetch is still one of my favorites, and so I go very heavy on it when I'm following it with a corn crop or with a llama bean crop. I've started to blend it with some Austrian winter peas, sometimes a little bit of clover. We struggle with clover to get it to germinate properly or to get it to germinate on time. And so it's something that we're still working through. And I've had plenty of and I'll call them experts, a lot of peers that I've been able to just ask questions to, and they've convinced me to start introducing a cereal crop with my legumes in order to get my CN ratios kind of back in check a little bit. That we were going so heavy on our legumes that we were potentially causing troubles for ourselves in getting things out of whack. And so that's a lot of what we're doing now, is introducing a little bit of cereal rye because of the economics of it. We really do like ryegrass. I can't see Dr. Van Gessel's face when I just call this plain ryegrass to see how he reacts when I say that. But annual ryegrass, and this one goes back way back into history for us. I have farmed for years with my grandfather, who he's going on now about 4 years next month. But he's the one that convinced me to try ryegrass, because he actually started interseeding corn with a Farmall A, and we still got the little spreader, little 6-volt spreader that he would hook behind a Farmall A and go into a corn crop and interseed ryegrass into corn. And I never understood it, but with our sandy soil on this coastal plain, everything that we can do to hold the soil together is beneficial. And he used to always claim that you could hook a chain onto that ryegrass and pull the rest of the world around. So something that we like to dabble with, and it's gotten to be almost restrictive for us now economically. And rye is a good second for us that we found. But I think I've answered a lot of your questions.
Yes, you did. You did, Jay. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I could go on forever when you ask me questions. So I'll try.
Well, it's interesting having all of you here from different areas of the country, because it really gives us a broad perspective of what you all do. Matt, we're going to go to you next. I'll ask the question again, just to remind everybody what it was. What cover crop species do you grow and why? And do you use mixes and why? And is there any certain criteria that you use for deciding which species that you're going to grow?
So the species that I grow, I usually grow with 2 different time frames. I have a cool season and a warm season. We primarily grow cool season cover crops because we typically have stuff growing in the warm season that needs to be there. So my cool season mix that I like to use, I really like the radishes. We have some really tight, heavy black soil that gets like concrete at the surface. We have a real high calcareous soil, so the high calcium and the high pH gets real tight and binds up the nutrients and binds up the surface. So I like to use that radish. It gets real big and deep and gets a lot of biomass for the earthworms, and it gets deep penetration and kind of breaks up that hard pan that we have. And So I like to use the radish, and I'll put some hairy vetch in there. I really like it for building nitrogen and general surface area coverage. You know, it's really good at running out and covering. We'll use oats, and the primary reason I use oats is because I'm dual purpose. This is a cover crop primarily to help the soil, but I also rotate some cattle into it, and the oats, you know, make a good forage for the cattle. And then I will use some Osher and winter peas for another nitrogen builder and just general biomass. That's my go-to. Sometimes we'll throw some Elbon rye. I like to use that Elbon rye at times. It helps for the cattle grazing, and it gets a grass crop in there. Sometimes it's difficult to source, and the oats are so convenient here that we just that's what we use for our grass, our rye, you know, coverage. But yeah, as far as the mixes, that's the mix that I use. That's the species I use, and that's the total mix. I kind of have a one go-to. All my land's real similar. So that's the mix that I've used so far. And the only thing that we'll do different is if we're going into a corn crop, following, you know, when it comes to the criteria I use to see which cover crop seed I'm going to use, it always depends on, you know, what's following it up. And like if I'm going into a corn crop following, then I'll usually have to leave the vetch out, just because, you know, we're terminating that cover crop in February to get the corn planted, and that vetch isn't going to do anything. It's barely going to be coming on by the time I'm terminating. So that's one criteria that you know, we try not to plant much corn. I like to plant milo because I get to plant it later, and we're playing with some other new crops that we're working on developing. But yeah, I mean, as far as species, that's what I like to use for the cool season. In the event that we get to plant some warm season stuff, you know, maybe following a wheat crop, if we're gonna just drill no-till right into the wheat stubble, I'll throw in some I just drew a blank.
Sorghum Sudan grass?
Well, we use a pearl millet.
Oh, pearl millet, yeah.
Yeah, I like to use that one, and I like to use the sun hemp.
Okay, sun hemp.
Sun hemp gets going real quick and doesn't take long to start building nitrogen. And the issue that we have with sun hemp is if it gets too wet and we can't get in the field, it will get too big on us and get stalky on us.
And woody, yeah, that species gets woody.
So in that case, I'll try to utilize my cattle to, you know, mob them in there, dump a bunch of cattle in there to stomp it all down and keep that in check, and then get them out and let it keep going back to work. So having the cattle aspect is real handy for me. I got a whole bunch of cows that I rotate around, and I can sort them all together and use them as a tool to, you know, do a job for me in a short amount of time. So that's kind of a different aspect. But the main thing
thank you.
The main thing that we run out of here is water. So getting people to get on board with the cover crops is difficult because they want to save all their water for their cash crop, and so they let their fields lay dormant and try to catch water, you know, all winter long, which I'm trying to break through to, you know, other people that, you know, that's not necessarily the case, but, you know, it's difficult to make change.
I understand that. I do. I get that question asked a lot being in Texas. We're going to transition to Don. Don, do you want me to read the question to you again? Sure. And you are on mute, so you'll have to, there you go. What cover crop species do you grow and why? And do you use mixes? And then is there any criteria that you use to select your species?
Well, any of our mixes are typically after small grains. So that would be from the end of July to the middle of August. We again look at overwintering and non-overwintering. We look at species that have the Arbiscule mycorrhizae fungi association, try to look for some of those. Obviously nitrogen building. Typically all of our spring summer crops will go to corn the following year. So yes, we're looking for some nitrogen building or contributing sources there. Mixes, we're constantly playing with the ratio of species in there, always trying to tweak it. We originally started out with the seed mix calculator that said you take the number of species plus one and you divide the monoculture rate by that. And we started that way, but that was a good way to start, to get us started. But we found that even using that some of the species were getting too heavy, particularly like I'll just use an example of radish. You'd get too much radish in there, and radish can overpower things. Sorghum Sudan grass is another thing that can get a foothold and start to overpower. And as they overpower these other species that they have in the mix, obviously it makes them dwindle and not perform as they should. So we're always playing with the mix and the ratio and how things go. But and every year is different. There's never 2 years the same how the cover crop performs. Sometimes, like hairy vetch, for instance, sometimes that just takes a hold and grows like gangbusters and great and wonderful. And other times you wonder if you put the mix in. I'm sorry, I got a frog in my throat now. Must be wheat dust. But we're constantly playing with the mixes and trying to tweak. And we look at dollar per acre investment too. We try to keep in that $35 to $40 per acre seed costs. Inoculants, we do use inoculants with them. That's something we came across many years ago with particularly processing peas, that putting some bacteria on there. We had a pea crop one year where when I had a 20-foot drill, I was able to turn the seed inoculant system on and off from the cab of the tractor. So I did a 27-acre field. Every other pass, I had inoculant on and no inoculant. And it was about a week before harvest when it started to really show that there was something going on, and got a hold of our local extension service, and they came out. Actually, the day they were in the field, the morning the pea harvesters pulled in, and they went out and pulled samples out of the different areas, and where we put the inoculant on, the peas were approximately a third of a ton more yield per acre, and tenderometer was 20 points lower. And with peas, lower tenderometer is higher dollars per ton, as some of you may know. when they get up to 140, they're off the chart, and you might as well be hauling in gravel.
Well,
But it's
just that helps.
Yeah, it's been a continual learning curve. I figured out a long time ago, the more I know, the less I know. That you get an answer to one question and that creates several more. So you're never done learning.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're a good observer. So it sounds like you're tweaking the ratios based on what you're observing, and you've tried many different kinds of ratios. How about you, Jade? Have you used a calculator or ratios or?
No, I guess we kind of calculate our own ratios, kind of come up with something that we think is best. And that's right. That's the worst part of what we do in agriculture, is it takes 12 months for us to restart an experiment. So a mentor that I really look up to has explained it, that we have between 40 and 50 tries to get this right. And that's quite profound when you really think about it. When you think about the rest of the world and how they do things in business, and we've got a 12-month business window, where other businesses have a lot shorter window, but we've got 40 years. Hey Jude, hang on a second for me. we've got 40 or 50 years to get this right, and there's so much that changes on a regular basis. So it like Don said, there's never 2 years the same when it comes to cover crop. Cover crop species that I forgot to mention, something that we're starting to do an awful lot of experimenting with, is buckwheat. And buckwheat, we have found, starts to break the bond of phosphorus in our soils and make it plant available. We have got soils with 1,600 parts per million phosphorus. We've got a tremendous amount of phosphorus in our soils, to the point where we're no longer allowed to apply manure, says our state government. So what we have found is, if we can break that bond, none of that phosphorus is available to us. We've done tissue samples that say that phosphorus sometimes in certain conditions is still low. So we're hopeful that if we can start to unlock that bond of phosphorus in our soils through some of these cover crop species, that they'll become available to our crop, and we should see an increase in yield. So something we're trying, instead of growing soybeans behind sweet corn, which is harvested first week in August, and taking a gamble as to whether we can get 20 or 30 bushels a acre on a crop of soybeans, we are utilizing that window to grow a very large crop of covers, and in this case something like buckwheat. So that's some of the interesting stuff that we're after.
So for the seeding rates, let's talk about seeding rates a little bit. So are you changing that yearly, or have you found a seeding rate that works for you for each species?
So seeding rate for us changes by the season. It changes by the method in which we plant, and it changes again, the emphasis on the season, but the time of year. So we'll plant hairy vetch in February with a planter, a 15-inch planter, about the time that folks around here start growing peas. So we'll stop about the 20th of December. We'll stop planting cover crops, and we'll start back up in the middle of February, 1st of February, depending on what the weather does for us. And so by being able to actually use a planter and actually plant that seed in the soil like you would corn or soybeans, we can singulate that seed and we can itemize it out, and we know how many seeds per acre we're planting versus how many pounds per acre of the seed we're planting. And we've been able to cut way back on our seeding rate when we actually use a planter. But obviously we can't use a planter when we're going across still green corn with an air seeder or an airplane. So that's when we have to up our seeding rate. We have also found that upping the seeding rate is crucial for an airplane versus the air seeder that you'll see pictures of. I don't know, Emily, can you get some of those pictures up there for me? Which is really just a high boy sprayer that's been modified with an air box and has drops, as you can see it there.
Very good.
Yeah. And
so you've tried all different ways: airplane, air seeders, planters.
Yes, we've tried spreading it on and working it in with vertical tillage. I think there's an opportunity for us to have a vertical tillage, a seeding box on vertical tillage equipment. I think there's opportunity for us. I'd love to talk to Don more about what he's doing with his drills. So you'll see there, and then there's one more picture, Emily, that's got the air seeder actually coming out of the cornfield.
Oh yes.
There you go. So that's really fascinating right there. If we can time that correctly, we can cut way back on our seeding rate. We'll follow that machine probably within a couple of hours if we do it correctly. We'll follow that machine with the combine. And if time allows, we'll mow our stalks in a timely manner as well. And that gets the fodder down on top of that cover crop seed. And everything we do is irrigated. So, if we run irrigation a couple of times, if it doesn't rain, we're practically guaranteed a good cover crop seed, or a good cover crop establishment, which is sometimes questionable whether we can do that with an airplane. And but know that factually we are still utilizing an airplane when it doesn't work out for us as far as timing is concerned.
Mhm. Matt, how about you for different seeding methods in seeding rates? Matt, what do you think? What are some
Like I
different
was-
things you've tried?
So we've tried to sling it out, and we're not irrigated. We're all dry land farming. So if I could sling it out, I mean, like Jay was saying, man, if you could put it down and then shred those stalks, harvest the corn, shred the stalks, and then turn the pivot on, I mean, that's just a dream for us. We don't have water. There's not enough water, groundwater here to do any irrigation, even if you did have the infrastructure. So we're always dependent on rainfall. So we like to have the moisture and then go no-till drill it into that moisture to get it up. I mean, it's just basically the only way we can ensure that our investment's going to come up like we need it to. We've gotten behind a few times and have slung it out, and some varieties or some species have success doing coming up that way, and some don't. You can throw radish seed on the ground and it will grow, to where peas not so much, or oats don't grow very well laying on top of the ground. And the way our soil type is, if we don't get that quick follow-up rain, it's not going to get incorporated, and the birds end up with it. So we primarily no-till drill in our cover crop seed.
Thank you. How about you, Don? You'll have to unmute a little bit. Try to unmute. There you go. Thank you.
We've tried, yeah, you saw my mouth moving, but no words.
Yeah.
We've tried several ways over the years, especially when we got into trying to do some interseeding. When we first bought this, we've got a rogator with an Air Max body on it, and we modified the outlets so we can put drop tubes on and actually drop seed or fertilizer right between the corn rows or soybean rows if desired. We tried it at corn. The first year we had it, corn was probably in that 5 foot tall range, which at that time was kind of the recommendation that's the stage you want to do it when the corn's getting up before it really tassels out and you can't get through it. And we did probably, between ourselves and a bunch of neighbors, we did probably 1,000 acres that year, and tried it a couple years later, a couple more times following years, and just could not get the stands. We saw that once the corn yields were above 175 bushel and beyond, that cover crop establishment, putting the seed on top of the ground like that, just wasn't working for us. It was too inconsistent. The only place you'd have a good catch was where you happen to run over a row when you're entering or exiting the corn rows. Then came the advice to do it early in the season when the corn's small, maybe 5-6 leaf, go in then. So we tried it that way. And again, success was so limited, we just felt it was a wasted effort for us here in New York to try doing it that way, that it just wasn't consistent enough. So then the next approach was with an airplane. Corn, we picked 3 of our farms that had corn and soybeans on the same farm right next to one another. We had neighbor friend who does tiling for us and actually has an airplane that he either sprays or spreads cover crop seed. Yeah, that's a picture of the airplane. And got a hold of Jesse and him come in, and we did probably about 300 acres like that. And that was it. The soybeans were just starting to drop leaves, and the corn was starting to dry down some. They said, "Oh, if you put it on, do it that way." Again, success was so hit and miss that we kind of gave up on that idea. It was a fun, futile attempt. covered a lot of ground. I mean, pardon my French, but he was shitting and getting with that airplane coming in, and with a seed tender like that, he'd hit the ground and we'd load him up quick. And I think it took him till about noon to do 300 acres that day with it. And it was fun, but just did not produce the fruit that we were looking for. Typically now everything is put in with our drill system, our 40-foot drill. Seed to soil contact is quite important. We follow, after we do our small grains in midsummer with our drill. That's just not a very good picture of our drill, but it's a picture of our drill with a Velmar air seeder. And with that, when we're running it, the main boxes come down through the front tube, and the Velmar air seeder comes down through the rear tubes. And we got them through a outboard boat facility in Florida, some Y tubes where we can reconfigure the hoses so we can do 2 rows with one species and then the next 2 with another. And it works out that it lines up with our 30-inch row corn planter. But again, we put one species through the front tubes and another species will come through the back tubes and accordingly on the road, correct rows. But that has worked out real good. The seed to soil contact, we've had great luck with that. Have to watch out after small grains, possibly if you have too much volunteer oats or too much rye, can compete with the crop some. But also with that drill in the fall, when we're planting our rye for a grain crop, of course, we set it up so we're doing 7.5-inch rows. We use that Velmar air box for our phosphorus application. We'll put straight map in that and put fertilizer in the row. The fertilizer comes down the rear set of tubes on there, so we're getting phosphorus right in with the seed, and that has just worked fantastic.
That's interesting.
That works great. We've pulled off some really good crops with putting the phosphorus on. I've got one field this year that we've got rye on. It's a new farm that we just picked up that soil test is not very good. I don't think phosphorus level could get much lower. And we planted some triticale on that for some seed production. And I told my son when he's planting it, just make a pass across there, just turn the Velmar off so we don't get phosphorus in that. And well, you don't need a flag in there to see where that spot is. So it'll be interesting when we harvest it in a few weeks to see how much of a yield difference there is. But driving by from the road, as I say, a blind man could see that. But
well, here's a question. Have any of you have any of yourselves used drones or heard of anybody else using drones to apply cover crop seed?
So I've seen it done. And it actually, I think it has potential to be in our future. Just like the conversation about airplanes here, I'm not so sure that it's a fit for everyone. I think that airplanes work better here than what they do for Matt or Don. And a lot of that is because of the amount of rain that we get. And the utilization of irrigation. I think drones have a place. It's very interesting to see the cost analysis work out, and that's what we're kind of working through now. Having teenagers and having a next generation that has the potential of coming back to the farm. That's kind of where we see things might be in our future, in our next 5 to 10 years. It's a very large investment, but I do see the utilization of drones being an opportunity, especially in our developed areas where every year we have the same group of people complain about airplanes flying fungicides on, and they feel that they're put in a position of being unsafe, and the local pilots get turned into the FAA. And I've got to, I've got to write a letter to the FAA explaining why they were here and what they were doing. And got to interact with people at their homeowners association meetings and things like that, explaining what the airplanes are doing. So I do think there's potential. I think there might be a better potential for some other avenues for cover crops other than a drone, but I think there's potential for drones in the ag market in the very, very near future. While I've got the microphone, though, I wanted to share something that an experiment we did a couple years ago that deserves a second chance, but just situations haven't worked out correctly. But a colleague of Dr. Van Gessel and myself, we're pretty good friends. He's an engineer by trade. And it was kind of our idea, our brainstorm, but he designed an inductor to put into a center pivot irrigation. And we actually, we tried to seed small seeded cover crops through an irrigation pivot. And we were able to get seed on the ground. And we were able to establish the cover crop in areas, but it's just that those are the kind of things, right, that you get a couple of buddies get together and they start tossing around ideas, and that's kind of what you come up with. So that's kind of where you really got to think outside the box on things.
Well, you farmers are very creative. That's the fun part of it too. I mean, using your creativity and working with the others to see what you can do. Anybody else have any comments on the drones?
Well, I've read about, drones, what they're trying to do with them now. And I guess my first comment will be that they've got a hell of a lot bigger now than what they used to be. So their payloads have greatly increased. And it's not just your little mom and pop, let's take it out and fly it around and take some pictures. And they're a lot bigger than what they used to be. Technology is just changing so fast. What's new today is old tomorrow, as everybody knows. And so yeah, there's spraying, they're using them for spot spraying and things like that. There's certainly places that I think drones are going to have their place. And again, there's places that they're not going to have their place. But yeah, I agree what was said, that sometimes your neighbors get a little concerned or upset, or okay, what are you doing now? What's going on out in that field? So neighbor relations are certainly important. Try to advise ahead of time if we can of what's going to be happening at times, to try and forego those instances of great concern. But
well, here's another question. Go ahead.
I think there's a future for drones. It's just finding the proper place for them.
Sure. Well, we're going to transition. So when we're talking about the uniformity of seeding, we know that's all important to you. That's important to all of you. So, and it sounds like each of you have tried different things. So let's transition into about seeding methods. One more question here, but then we need to get into our question and answer so that you have time to speak to the audience questions. Actually, Emily, do you want to do that now?
I think we have time to answer that last area
Okay,
that you wanted to discuss.
Thank you. So here's one more question. How does your choice of seeding methods change as it gets later in the fall? How about you, Matt?
That one's easy for me. We're always going to no-till drill it, no matter what time it is. It's the only successful option we have because we don't have water. So basically, we wait around until there's a rain, and we catch a rain, and when the moisture's right, being that we're no-till, we can get in that field much more rapidly. The ground will hold the equipment up much more sooner, so we can get in that field after following a rain and put that seed into moisture, and that's our success rate. So we're dictated by strictly on Mother Nature. So that one's easy answer. We're going to drill it when we can drill it.
Thanks, Matt. How about you, Jay?
So that's where a lot of the interchanging comes in for us, and it's all seasonal for us. So into a standing cash crop, as early as the first part of August, we're running an air seeder, or we're utilizing an airplane to get that crop in. And what we try to do is get it in the field when we're still running irrigation. That way we're not spending the extra input, spending the money to irrigate a crop that's senescing, only to get a cover crop to germinate and stay alive. Sometimes we get a dry enough season that if we do not irrigate, that cover crop will germinate, and then it will die for lack of moisture in the upper layer of the soil. As time goes on, and we start to lose daylight, it seems to be the determining factor, daylight and growing degree days, that as it starts to get shorter days of the year, and we start to lose temperature in the soil, we found that if we actually transition from applying to the top of the soil and applying to the top of soil, and either utilizing vertical tillage or mowing our stalks, we go one step further, and we actually will switch over to a drill or a planter. And that seed, if it goes in the soil, if it doesn't germinate because it's gotten too cold, or if it doesn't germinate because the conditions aren't right, it actually stays in the soil. We've been able to seed a lot of hairy vetch, and I think Emily, if you want to throw a picture up there of some of the hairy vetch we plant green into with our planter. Some of this hairy vetch that it gets planted in the fall. It gets planted in clear up into December, and we won't see it until March. It won't, it'll either won't germinate, or it'll germinate and be so small that you can't see it unless you get down on your hands and knees and start scratching the soil. A lot of these small seeded cover crops. Yeah, there you go. That's us planting sweet corn into hairy vetch. Is there another picture next to it? I mean, this stuff is, well, there's part of the reason why we do what we do. Yeah, that's what it looks like behind the planter. So if you look off to the far left of that vetch is about knee high. In some places it's waist high. So we've credited ourselves there. We've credited ourselves close to 80 units of nitrogen out of that vetch. That'll have us, that's sweet corn we planted into that. Yeah, there you go. There's the toolbar of the planter that you can't see. And we've done a tremendous amount of research in weed suppression with a lot of these cover crops too, and been able to cut way back when we see a cover crop species like that we're growing a cash crop into. So
excellent.
That the reason I wanted to bring that picture up, that was an example of what was put on with the air seeder too late in the year, and we thought we had lost the crop. And we thought we were going to have to kind of transition into something different to get that extra utilization of our N. And about the middle of March, you started to see the field green up. And once you got out there in it, it was hairy vetch, and it was coming hard and fast. And by the time we planted in the middle of May, that's what we were planting into. So we've also been able to do that by utilizing a 15-inch planter and different types of plates. For vetch, we use a sorghum plate, and we'll get a stand that looks like that, and it won't be planted until early spring.
That looked really nice. Very nice. Weed suppression looked great on that field. How about you, Don? Do you have anything you're doing different as you're working towards the later fall, or?
Well, I know the question comes up, how late's too late? And I guess the first thing is depending on what you're planting. And, after soybeans and corn, typically it's just straight rye. And my son's philosophy is, if you can get it in the ground, you can plant it. If the ground's not froze hard, I think Jody has a slide up there of our drill running in the snow on one of the fields, and dug some seedlings up a few weeks later, and they had germinated, started to grow. And come springtime, the rye came up great, looked good. We had a cover crop on there, and yeah, this was this was after soybeans, planting rye in the snow. Worked good. That's a picture of a seedlings that we dug up. Obviously, the picture says December 4th we planted that. Finished the field. We parked the drill for the night, and that was the last field we were going to do. And we got a snowstorm, about a foot of snow. So we decided to leave the tractor and drill sit where it was instead of driving it down the roads that had been heavily salted and sanded. And a few days later, when the roads dried off a little, we brought the drill home, cleaned it up, put it away. But I went back, on the 13th of January, and the snow on the ground. Obviously, the ground did not freeze, but digging up the rye seedlings and seeing that they had germinated was, the heat was still held in the soil. The snow insulated it, and so that's why I say it's never too late. If you can get it in the ground. Yes, we've had situations with a lot of wet weather, rainy weather, and that afterwards that you'd have some drowned out spots. That was a field just up the road from us. That was several years ago. It had been winter wheat, and we had seeded medium red clover on it, frost seeded it in the spring. A picture. Yeah, I don't have the fanciest presentation sometime, but the field averaged 213 bushel dry, and applied nitrogen along with the clover was, as it says, 0.62 pounds of nitrogen per bushel. So that was one of our earlier eye openers that there's more to this than we thought. But
Thanks, Don. Emily has some questions from the audience that we'd like to present to the panel here.
Yeah, so we have one from Carl, and some of you guys answered this a little bit, but he was looking, I think, for more specific planting dates for cereal rye into corn and soybeans. And Don, you touched on this. It looks like you planted into December. Does anybody else have a sort of I can't plant cereal rye into corn or beans after this date?
I guess I'd say, from our part, our advantage is we have a no-till drill, so we can get good seed soil contact. But we do have, Emily, have some pictures there of some fields where neighbors had gone in with a spin spreader after soybeans, and one picture shows a field where they ran out of seed, so they quit, and where they put it on with a spin spreader that particular year, they had a good catch, nice cover crop. And obviously where they did not, this picture here, they did part of the field. They went around, did part of the field, and ran out of seed, and they packed up and went home. And I saw that, said, maybe they should have kept going. But no, it doesn't always work that good. But you don't always hit a home run. If you can at least get a base hit, be happy with that. You got to try. Soil health is key and crucial to crop production.
Don, here's a question from John Wallace for you. Do you use cover crop seeding rates based on seeds per acre or pounds per acre when you're getting seed counts on your rye?
Well, it all comes back to pounds per acre, but we look at the seeds per pound too, and we obviously adjust our pounds per acre based on the seeds per pound. And that was if you happen to get white clover can be, if I remember right, up over 300,000 seeds per pound, and you can get in some medium red clover, and that might be a couple hundred seeds per pound. you get into larger seed like vetch or field peas, things like that, where you have a much larger seed. Obviously, you don't have the same number of seeds per pound, but those larger seeds, what we've seen in the past, is far more critical to get seed to soil contact with those larger seeds to get them to germinate and to come up and grow good. Smaller seeds, sometimes you can throw them on top of the ground and they'll be able to catch and get going for you. But it's the larger seed sizes that need seed to soil contact.
Thank you. And just a reminder to folks in our audience, feel free to drop any questions you have in that Q&A box. We're also scooping some up from the chat. So as long as you put them somewhere, we'll find them. A couple questions.
To answer Carl's question a little bit further.
Go ahead, Jay. Thank you.
I feel like we haven't quite answered his question exactly what he's looking for. In our area, we've got to make sure that we can get our small grains to tiller if we want to be able to utilize them correctly. And I guess it's a furthermore question to the ones that, Don specifically, does that necessarily matter on something like a cover crop, or really what you're trying to do is establish a root base underground? But I guess maybe to answer his questions a little bit, Emily, there's a picture there of us planting soybeans intercropped into our wheat. And this wheat was planted on the 20th of December. By the time we got our ducks in a row to get our planter configured the way we wanted to plant wheat with.
This the one?
Yep, it's with that. That's the harvest. So it should be a smaller old school tractor. Top right, that one.
There it is.
So that wheat right there that's planted in, we'll say, twin rows, that wheat we configured a planter and used a wheat plate on a white planter, and we configured that's 7.5 inch spacing on a 30-inch row. And so what we did, we came back in with a soybean planter and we planted soybeans into the intercropped rows the end of April. But I wanted to point out that wheat was planted on the 20th of December, and obviously it had enough cold weather to it that it was able to tiller properly. And honestly, we only had about 5 days of freezing temperatures this winter for us. So it was enough. And so that's, I guess, maybe to help reiterate the point that if you can get that stuff in the ground and get good seed to soil contact, in my opinion, it does not matter when you plant that cover crop. Get it in the ground.
Thank you, Jay. Yeah. Matt, any thoughts from you on giving up when you give up in the winter? I know you said moisture is your big.
Yeah, moisture is our problem no matter what. And I just love hearing y'all talk about having moisture. We're at 109 right now, and we're harvesting corn right now. And you walk the field after the combine leaves, and y'all were mentioning overseeding down the middle of the corn rows. Well, if you drop seed in the middle of our corn rows right now, it's going to fall about 6 feet. There's cracks that I can stick my whole foot in, and you cannot see the bottom of them. I mean, it's just endless drought and heat. It's been over 102 for the last 6 weeks. So those things sound awesome, but that certainly doesn't work here. So yeah, our going to be moisture, and the other problem we have is we're planting corn, February 10th. So we always run out of time too. We try to we don't have enough moisture when the corn comes off in August to plant. So we try to squeeze it in September, October. And then usually by the end of sometime around Thanksgiving, we're going to be shutting it down because we've only got, 60 to 90 days before we're planting corn. So we're trying to squeeze the cover crop into a very small window here. So it's kind of different than what I'm hearing from other places.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's what we want to hear, something different. So thank you. Well, we've talked about how late you can put cover crops on. Let's switch to the other side of the season. Do you make any adjustments for going early on seeding rate? Do you worry about herbicide carryover? Is too early ever too early, or what's been your experience with that, Don?
Herbicide, potential herbicide carryover, something you need to focus on too. But for us with a biostrip till after the small grains, typically there's not a herbicide you have on there. There are some you could put on that could have a large carryover. Spur might carry over a little longer, but obviously you have to be cognizant of what you're using, what you had used on it. But we have in the past, we talk about planting green. Years ago, I did it with a pea crop, not knowing what I was doing. We had no cover crop on a field, and it overwintered, and the field was green. And the canning factory wanted me to plant peas, and I was going to plant peas there. So I planted the pea crop into the green oats, and then I came in afterwards and terminated it. And this was before planting green was a term. My son tried a few years ago, spreading some rye in the spring, and we had two fields that were connected to one another, and he made a pass across where we're going to put some soybeans, and the other part was going to be corn, and the rye came up and grew, but we ended up with some green heads in the soybeans. That the rye we did not get it terminated, and it made a head. It didn't make any grain because it did not go through the winter freeze thaw thing, I guess. So it screwed its life cycle up a little bit, but it was interesting that he decided he wouldn't do that again. So it's all live and learn. That, I guess, I really would like to emphasize that live and learn part, that if you see something that you have question of what, I've go out in the field so many times, digging things up, pulling things up, looking at things that you see something a little query out there, go out and investigate it some, and try to research it and try to make sense of it. Gain as much knowledge out of even a mistake. Gain as much knowledge as you can out of it, so you can forewarn others of potential risk or the benefits.
Yeah. How about you, Jay? Have you had any issues with herbicide carryover, going too early? Is there too early for you?
I'm sure there is too early for us, right? I mean, we can't put atrazine in a corn crop and then come in at V5, V8 and plant peas or something like that. But also understand we grow sweet corn that's planted generally the middle of May, and depending on growing degree days, it's harvested the end of July, first part of August, and we have a cutoff date, kind of a policy just within ourselves that roughly the 5th of August, if we can get that soybean crop in the 5th of August, we're going to plant it and we'll be able to harvest it. And most times we'll be able to recover our costs anyway. And we haven't seen any herbicide carryover, and we're using things with Callisto in them and atrazine. So that's something to be able to look at. I know there's a lot of farmers in the Midwest, starting in Ohio and other areas, that are utilizing certain cover crops as their weed control into a corn crop. There was talks there for a while of some guys actually interseeding soybeans into corn, both Roundup Ready species. That way, those two would kind of the soybeans would act as a nutrient source for the corn. And there was I'd seen some pictures there a while that someone had dug up some roots, and the nodules that were in the soybeans the corn plants, had the roots of the corn had actually wrapped themselves around the nodules of the soybean plant. And the soybeans weren't but 6 inches tall, real leggy, because they had no sunlight, but they were feeding that corn crop. And so there's all kinds of ideas, and I've just talked in a circle, but I haven't really necessarily answered your question, besides saying that, read your labels, utilize people like Dr. Van Gessel, and his colleague from Penn State that I think is on here, his peer from Penn State. I know there's an awful lot of research they've done on some of this stuff. I know there's a published paper out there from Bayer Crop Science, about 5 or 6 years ago, had done a tremendous amount of showing how their herbicides interacted with certain cover crops, and it actually listed many species of cover crops and many of their herbicides that they produce. So that's out there somewhere, but I don't know exactly where.
Yeah, thank you. Matt, as dry as you guys get, do you maybe have more issues with herbicide carryover? Have you run into that?
So, I think what typically happens here is we're waiting on moisture in order we get our spring crops, our summer crops off in August, and we're waiting on moisture. And during that time, I think the sun gets so hot and the surface of the soil gets so hot, I think most of those chemicals break down with that heat. I know the sunlight breaks it down real fast, and so we haven't seen any issues at all. Everything always comes up good, and we're using, more recently we started using some things that has a much longer carryover, like Resicor. So we'll see what happens there. We're going to plant some stuff, but I honestly don't think that most of our active ingredients are getting burned up with the heat. So I don't think that'll be an issue.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad the heat has some advantage down there. Mark and John, I'm gonna share my screen so that folks who came here for CEU credits can get their credits here. So can you take over with any more questions we might have in that list?
Sure. So throw this out there for the three panelists. One of the things we've heard at times is that by drilling, you can gain 1 to 2 weeks of early season growth compared to that might be flown on or even turbo tilled in. And I know we've talked a little bit about getting better establishment with drilling, but have you seen, what's your thoughts on, say, for the first 2 to 3 weeks of growth after seeding? Do you think that there's an advantage of early season growth with drilling versus that might be spun on, or maybe even aerial seeding? Are you seeing a more rapid, not just establishment, but rapid growth with drilling?
So from our experience here, I think that all comes down to the seed to soil contact. If we've got good moisture and we no-till drill it in, and we've got immediate seed to soil contact, we've got moisture in the soil, that thing's going to germinate and get going quicker and put its roots down faster, to where if it's applied at the surface, it's going to take a little bit longer to germinate, and it's got a longer way to go to run its root down. And that's my opinion, basically. But the way I see it is that seed to soil contact and getting that seed down into the soil where it's going to do its work will gain you some time.
Well, I would have to agree with that. The biggest advantage with your seed to soil contact is the fact that moisture, the seeds can invite moisture so much easier if they're surrounded by a moist surface. Where on top of the ground, yes, during the night they may take on some moisture, but then during the daytime the sun comes out, if you have sunshine, could dry the seeds back out. then once the root starts to get in the ground, same thing could happen. So, yeah, there's little question in my mind. Drilling and getting seed to soil contact certainly has a big advantage. But then again, you got to look at what particular grower has available to them. If they don't have a drill, if their only recourse is broadcast or aerial seeding, you know, you have to factor that in too. But again, we like drilling. You know, even a conventional drill. You know, I talked about we have a no-till drill, but years ago on a sweet corn field, I had a little bit of seed wheat left in the drill where I was planting wheat, and I went across the road where we had taken some sweet corn off to run the wheat out. And that following spring, I should have planted the whole damn field. That just with a conventional, an old 5100 international drill with nothing special, man, that wheat looked great where I ran the drill out. So sometimes you don't know what you got until you try it. And that's what I would say. Try it first.
Something
All
else.
right,
Something I-
Go ahead.
Just let me add something real quick. Something I'd like to add is we've been doing a lot of focusing on the biology within the soil. And that's another whole sector of, I could go on for hours and hours about that. But when you get that seed drilled into that soil, it is surrounded by moisture, but it's also surrounded by microorganisms that are breaking down that seed coat, and they're penetrating through that exterior of that seed, and they're offering immediate food source for that very initial root that comes out. So that's why we really try to get it down into the soil, is let nature start doing its thing, and that will gain you some time also. You know, it's the moisture, but it's also that biology going to work.
Thank you, Matt.
So
Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead, Jay. You want to get one thing in?
To Matt's point, I mean, that could be a whole nother conversation for a whole nother day, is trying to match up that microbiology in the soil. That's the stuff that's what I sit up at night thinking about, is, all right, what's this do and why is it do it? How's it do it? And how's that stuff work? But to Mark Van Gessel's question, in our climate, and this is the difference between Don and Matt and myself, you know, we're totally different than either one of those two are. We have found that, and again, I'm going to say something that's going to trigger somebody, I know, but the climate is changing. I think that if we all really think good and hard about it, we can agree that the climate's changing. I'm not going to say why, because that's where the discussion should happen, that we probably would disagree on. But I would say that the climate is changing, and our climate is getting warmer in fall, and our not seeing manage early on in the fall with it into whatever crop that you just harvested, versus coming in early before harvest and getting a cover crop established. Again, a lot of that says my internet's unstable. Am I still good?
Yeah, we lost a little bit of it.
All right, let me turn my face off and we'll try it again. We have found that if we can get our cover crop established into a standing cash crop, that when we harvest that cash crop, we have an established cover crop.
Hello.
And it is weeks beyond what we would get if we were to drill that cover crop, specifically something like radishes or turnips, something like that, that if we can get that in early, that we gain so much more biomass, gain so much more root matter out of those early established cover crops than if we were to wait until the harvest was done.
Got it. Yes, I think we got that, Jay. Thank you. We are past our 90 minutes here. And I just wanted to thank our farmer panelists so much. I know we pulled you guys away from your very active farming operations. So thank you so much for that. And thank you, Jody, for guiding us through this list of questions and keeping us on task. One final note, this forum was recorded, and I will post the recording of it on our website next week. Our multimedia team will do that, and I will send out an email to all of our attendees here at that time, so you can catch up on anything you might have missed. I did post the CEU credit certification QR code and also the tracking number. If you have any issues with that, just let me know. I put my email in the chat. But otherwise, thanks everybody for making time for this. And we really appreciate it, and keep an eye out for future Grow Farmer forums.